Here it is.
Hopefully now I've got it.
And the rabbi is here. Are you ready to start?
Yeah.
Are you ready to start?
Yeah. I just can't get the,
Oh, jeez, here we go again.
I can't get the print on my page. That's the problem. I want to split it and put the print on one side.
Oh, I haven't done that.
There's a thing where it says
iPad?
share screen.
Pardon me?
There's on the bottom of the screen, it says participants chat and share screen. So on the
Participants
bottom,
I have.
What are you trying to share the screen with?
Says participant
I'm
That
trying
says
to
chat,
get.
then it
I
says
don't know
green
how to
share.
do it,
green share.
yeah,
but I'm trying to
Are
get
you
it.
trying to put your PDF on there as well as the people?
No, I'm just trying to put a screen on that has the verbiage that we're reading today.
But, oh, on the iPad, what are you on, the computer now?
Well, it's an iPad, but it's a computer iPad.
Yeah, but I have an iPad, but when I do that, I put the PDF on the iPad and then I watch the Zoom on something else, either my phone or my computer.
Well, that's what I'm trying to do, but my phone isn't cooperating.
Thank you.
So I don't know how far I can go with this except to listen.
Okay. Well, I
Okay.
always use two devices because I've never tried to put the PDF on while the people pictures were on. I don't think. you
Well,
can-
that's the problem. My phone isn't working and doing that, so I'm trying to do it on the iPad.
let us begin here. We're running a little late.
Well, I'll just
Hi,
listen then.
Amanda. How are you doing? Question mark.
Okay. Rabbi, you ready?
Yes.
Okay. Let us begin with the blessing. 1, 2, 3. Baruch atah
Atah Adonai,
Eloheinu melech
Olam,
haolam.
Asher
Kiddushanu v'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lazot divrei Torah.
Torah,
Blessed are
Blessed
you,
are you,
Adonai,
our God, ruler of
for the
the world,
world,
who has sanctified us with your
sanctified us with the
commandments
commandments,
and
manifest
commanded us to
engaged
engage
in the
in the
words
words of
of
Torah. Amen. Okay.
Yeah, pretty good, actually.
We did good. I'm impressed.
We didn't sound like,
It doesn't take much.
Well, we're all over the place, so.
Hello, Lori. Welcome to our group.
Yes, welcome.
Welcome
ready?
to everybody. Good morning. Hi, Steve.
Good.
Did I cut you off?
Me? No.
Welcome to Rick and Lori, our two newest participants. And welcome back to everybody else. Welcome to B and Pam and Shirley and Cy and Riva and Donna and Minya, Bernie, Marcia, and of course, Steve.
early.
Today we are on page 115 at the very bottom, Perek Bet, different views on kashrut, the Jewish art of eating. So I was looking at the Reform rabbis. There are about 2,000 Reform rabbis in the U.S. that are members of the CCAR, the Central Conference of American Rabbis, and of which I'm a member. And it's kind of like a union for rabbis. So they have a pension fund and we pay dues. And the joke was you could only get thrown out for not paying your dues. But we have they used to have a list, or they still have a listserv that every day they'd send you a list of messages that were submitted, and people could talk about whatever they wanted to talk about. And now there's also a private Facebook group. And I somehow my Facebook popped up. I don't really use Facebook, but I've got an account and I'm a member of this group. And so I was shocked to see one of the rabbis is saying, well, I don't find the Passover dietary restrictions meaningful. And I do it out of habit, but I like the Seder. But other than that, not eating bread and all this stuff for 7 or 8 days, I find completely meaningless. And then there was a string of comments from 8 or 10 or 12 other rabbis basically saying the same thing. Me too, me too. And, I was thinking, if I showed this to any of my Orthodox friends, they would say, aha, you see. So, so I know this is not directly related to our topic, but, it's dietary restrictions, which is, the Passover dietary restrictions or the year-long dietary restrictions. It's the same concept, although not necessarily completely for the same reason. And as you probably know, I think pork is in a separate category as well. But anyway, I was a little shocked. I've never really thought how much meaning I find in Passover restrictions. I mean, I'm not a super strict person on anything really, but I don't have a roast beef sandwich on Passover, or I don't know what's more, another, or pour it down with a beer, or whatever. But I guess in non-Orthodox Judaism, everything is now up for grabs, and practices have to have meaning. And if they don't have meaning, you can't just say it's a law, you have to do it. And, we've talked about this in different contexts. There's the mishpatim, the chukim and the mishpatim. There's laws that have common sense reasons, and there's laws that don't. And the prime example of the laws that don't is shotness, where it says in the Torah, you're forbidden to mix wool and linen in the same garment. And so many men's suits are made of this combinations, and so the ultra-Orthodox have shotness laboratories. Before you buy a suit, they test the material to make sure that you're not buying a prohibited combination of material. Why would you not buy a suit that has linen and wool? Well, there's all sorts of possible reasons. It's teaching us whatever, but there's no obvious reason. In contrast to that, the prohibition of murder is clear. It's a very bad thing to kill someone unnecessarily, and it would also result in the almost immediate destruction of civilized society. So I don't think I have to sit here and argue that Judaism should not allow murder. But shotness, so the question is, the kashrut laws, the food laws in general, where does it fit more toward murder? Does it fit more toward shotness? And if so, or if not, how do people feel about it and why? And if we decide it's not irrelevant, we can all meet for lunch and have our roast beef sandwiches, or we can have our pork sandwiches with cheese on it. And then, so that's my opening comment. And, let's hear some brief comments, and then we'll get into the text itself.
Well, I always felt that the reason for the matzah and refraining from the wheat was because that's what they did when they came out of Egypt, and it was in honor of this. They didn't have time to have the bread rise and have a tasty slice of bread, so they made the matzah. I'm assuming, and maybe I'm wrong, that this was the first time that matzah was ever used. And so this was strictly in honor and recognizing what happened at that time.
Okay, so for you, Donna, eating matzah And by the way, my Trader Joe's matzah ran out last night, so I'm matzah-less at the moment. So for you, it's a reminder of the mythology of Judaism related to the slavery in Egypt and the exodus from Egypt and so forth. And so it's a concrete and distinctive reminder of part of our religious history.
Right, and I don't mind matzah. I actually like matzah. I keep it in the house year round and eat it sometimes with jelly on it or whatever. But so it's not a real problem for me.
Okay.
And I also think that because God said to do it, I needed to do it.
Okay, good. Rick or Lori, any comments? Okay, Pam.
I'm looking forward to the discussion of creeping things. That's going to be the highlight today.
Okay, creeping things like little bugs. When my father was in the army in Korea, he ate chocolate-covered grasshoppers.
Right, so did my husband.
Or that's what he told me,
It
sometimes.
was true.
And were they chocolate-covered?
Yes, yes.
Okay, well,
And
okay,
sometimes just fried in oil.
Bernie, are you gonna do you accept this idea that these rabbis are pushing now, that the Passover food prohibitions are lacking in meaning and inspiration, and it's time for at least people on a private basis to just forget about it?
I think that it's important to observe at least some of the customs. I don't think it's necessary to avoid everything at all, like the Orthodox won't eat corn because it's a fermentable grain, or peas, or rice. But I think it's important to at least pick something and go with it.
Why?
Tradition.
Okay, so there's the argument of tradition. My parents did it, my grandparents did it, or even if my grandparents didn't do it, it's my connection to the traditional past. This is what connects me to Judaism, that I'm doing at least a little bit of what the sages from 500 years ago did. And if I don't have anything to connect me to the tradition, then I'm really not connected. Okay, it's a good argument. Riva.
You're muted.
Unmute. Rita.
Yeah, thank you. I had a phone call come in. Anyway, my comment is that I wonder if there might be a generational difference between the rabbis who are more likely to be less interested in the food restrictions than their elders. And of course, Facebook and whatever you call listservs don't or blasts don't include the age of the people who are responding.
Oh,
I know the rabbi was, I'm sorry.
Sorry, just to interrupt. The listserv is mostly older rabbis. The Facebook is mostly somewhat younger rabbis. So yes.
So was there a difference between the two groups?
Oh, well, it's interesting because, the older people are more stuck in the dialogues of the earlier generation, which doesn't necessarily always make them more traditional, but you could tell immediately that they're older. And you have some really people who are anti-Israel on the listserv in particular, who are now in their 70s, and they were raised in a very radical left-wing political environment of the 60s. And they, and whereas the younger people, they have, they're, so I don't know if it's always the views, but you can tell the ages, that they're, the way they frame topics and the influences they have and the way they think about things. So the Facebook people who are saying Passover customs have no meaning for us are mostly in their 30s and 40s, I would imagine. You know, though, you know, I'm observing there, but I only post if I, you know, want something like help me with outreach, or, you know, I don't just give opinions there. You know, it's not my social group really. Back to you. Sorry, Reva.
No, I think that reinforces what I was thinking, and that is there are generational differences in terms of how people view the value of food restrictions. Just a second quick comment. I occasionally went to the Hillel at Georgetown University in DC, and to their Hillel, and they followed eco-kosher, which I think is common among some of the reconstructionists and some others, that there's a value in being careful about your diet, but it's based on different values or different focus. And that is, you want to preserve the earth and you want to make sure there's food for everybody, those sorts of issues, rather than the traditional kosher values.
Okay. And that's, I talk about that in my book, Contemporary American Judaism, in quite detail. Minya, Marcia, Steve.
Steve,
I'm trying to get my phone to work. My father explained kosher to me, milk and meat, by saying why it was separated, because there were wooden plates and it would curdle with milk. It was because of the desert, and I followed what he said, and I follow the Passover in honor of my parents.
Okay. Steve.
Wouldn't it also be considered a sacrifice of eating certain foods?
I don't
Restrictions?
think Judaism really has that same concept of like Lent. For Christians, you give something up. I don't think we're giving something up, namely chametz, in the same sense. I think it's just part of the halacha. Halacha provides a certain legal framework which allows and disallows, but I don't think it's really about giving something up in that sense. I don't think, at least that's not the original meaning. There's no reason we can't bring in that as a new reason, but I don't think it's original.
Okay.
Lori.
Okay, so the blood that was on the houses was to be a sign so that God would pass over and he wouldn't destroy us when he was striking Israel. And fulfilling the plague. And so one of the plagues. So it says in the Torah, I'm going to go to the scripture, and I, by the way, do keep Passover. I take it very seriously. But it says, this day shall be to you one of remembrance. You shall celebrate it as a festival to Adonai throughout the ages. You shall celebrate it as an institution for all times. For all time. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the very first day, you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day to the seventh day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. So I look at it as, I don't want to be cut off from my people. We're supposed to celebrate it. It's never a bad thing to remember a blessing God bestowed on us, and by passing over us and not destroying us, along with the firstborn of Egypt, you know, that's a huge blessing for us. So I definitely feel like I take it seriously. I don't think it's out of date for me whatsoever.
Yeah, okay. And kashrut in general, Lori?
So I'm a vegetarian, so it's very easy for me to keep kosher when it's not Passover. My house is not completely kosher. I'm in a relationship with my fiance of almost 22 years, but he is Jewish, but he does not keep kosher. If he wants a cheeseburger. So we have his set of dishes, and then we have my vegetarian dairy dishes. So I do have separation in my house during the year, but we're supposed to keep a shalom bayit, a peaceful home. So I don't force him to do something that's not moving to him, but in Passover, that's my special time. I get to have the whole kitchen to myself. Everything gets packed and cleaned and all the kosher products come in, and he's pretty good about it. He has his little naughty room in the other room, but it's very important to me. Kosher is very important to me.
And it's a guy thing. He's got it. It's a guy thing.
And we voted for a new kitchen policy, which is really the same as our old kitchen policy, which is no pork, no shellfish, and no meat and cheese on the same plate. And so it was announced, therefore, that if you wanted to, you could take a cooked hamburger and go somewhere else and, just take some cheese off of another table and put the cheese on the hamburger, making yourself a cheeseburger. And Warren Bencover corrected that immediately and said that putting a piece of cold cheese on a hot hamburger individually does not make a cheeseburger. A cheeseburger has to be cooked that way. Otherwise, it's not really a cheeseburger. But either way, it would violate the rabbinic enactment not to put cheese and meat together. And so, but whether we find this meaningful or not, that's it. All right, is there any other opening comments? If not, let's get to the text. Bottom of page 115 in the very right-hand bottom corner. Marcia, are you interested in reading?
Sure. I've been quiet today, huh? All right. Different views on kashrut, the Jewish art of eating. As we have already noted in our discussion of Torah's laws against the eating of blood, see Parsha Tzva Perek Bet. Jewish tradition links holiness with diet. Parsha Shemini, I don't know if I said that right, presents a list of foods that are permitted for eating and a list of foods that are forbidden. These lists, together with the prohibition against eating blood, form the basis for kashrut, or laws relating to approved Jewish diet. When we refer to a food as kosher, from the Hebrew kasher, meaning proper or fit, we mean any food fit for eating according to Jewish law. The term terafah, from the Hebrew torah, meaning torn to pieces, describes any food unfit for consumption or any utensil that may have been contaminated and is therefore unfit for use in the preparation or eating of food.
Okay, just to stop you for a minute. So Harvey Fields here is just giving a little information, correct? Is there anything here that is surprising, new, controversial? I don't think so. Okay, keep going.
The Torah permits the eating of all animals with cloven hoofs that chew the cud. The pig is not permitted because it does not chew the cud. All fish with fins and scales may be eaten. Shark and shrimp are not permitted because they have no scales.
In Alabama, they said that this doesn't apply on the Gulf Coast, the part about the shrimp.
I love their shrimp. Okay. Some rabbinic authorities permit the eating of sturgeon and swordfish, while others do not. There are 24 kinds of fowl permitted for eating. They are not birds of prey. All of them have one toe larger than the others. They have a crop and a gizzard with an inner lining that can easily be removed. The Torah also permits the eating of locusts as long as they have 4 wings, feet, and jointed legs.
And they can be covered in chocolate, but it can't be dairy chocolate.
Dark chocolate.
Oh, is that mixing meat with the meat of the bug?
Yeah.
Okay. All creeping things, including the weasel, mouse, great lizard, gecko, land crocodile, lizard, sand lizard, and chameleon are forbidden foods.
That's too bad. Sand lizard is just unbelievably good if you roast it.
Good to know. So are snakes, scorpions, worms, and insects. The Torah also forbids the eating of any foods that have been contaminated by contact with prohibited animals, carcasses, or decomposed foods. Kashrut also includes the separation of all milk and meat products, as well as utensils used in their preparation or serving. The Torah forbids boiling a kid in its mother's milk. To make certain that this prohibition was observed, the rabbis of the Mishnah forbade the mixing of all milk and meat. They also designated a waiting period of 6 hours between eating meat and milk, and a waiting period of 3 hours between milk and meat. Some authorities say that 1 hour between milk and meat is permissible. It's nitpicking, I think. Do you want me to read kosher terms?
No.
What explanation is given for this emphasis upon diet in Jewish tradition? Why does the Torah and subsequent Jewish law place such importance upon kashrut, or the art of eating?
All right, and this is the big question. Now already Riva has thrown down the glove in challenge and says, well, and here I'm paraphrasing her, or maybe I'm interpreting her, and if I'm not interpreting her correctly, she's here to correct me at any moment. But she said, well, maybe the traditional understanding of food laws may or may not be relevant today, but there's new ways of interpreting food laws that are definitely relevant. And she mentioned the eco-kashrut, that to eat, for example, this kind of annoys me, although I kind of understand when you go and you buy a dozen frozen fish in a bag, and it comes in a big plastic bag, and each fish is wrapped in its own, plastic. So by the time you get done, you've thrown out so much plastic, which doesn't biodegrade. Now, I know they do that because it keeps the fish, I guess, from absorbing the freezer burn, smell or taste. So it's better, quote unquote, but there's so much plastic. Of course, another thing that irritates me is the little bags that you pick up the dog's poop in. Poop is a totally natural fertilizer thing. And then you're introducing this plastic bag that you then throw out, and it just seems so contrary to environmental considerations that it's just I just again.
Do they make compostable bags?
Yeah, they do,
Yes,
I
they do.
guess, a little bit. So you have to get those, I guess. So, but there is ways to reinterpret, the idea of eating, of what you eat. You are what you eat, but that may require reinterpretation. So it may not be beer and sandwiches on Passover that's the problem. It may be fish that's wrapped in 4 layers of plastic, or whatever. But maybe we do want to focus on eating, but it's very, I don't know. I just have the sense that if I start trying to push that in our congregation, it's not going to resonate well with people. I mean, they're not going to get mad at me. They're just going to tune out and ignore it completely. So so there's no point in, pushing something if people won't, but maybe the group here is far more sensitive to that sort of thing. Okay, I'll give it over to Riva to respond. Did I quote you correctly, Riva? And then
Yeah, no, you quoted me correctly. I would argue with relationship to the fish preservation. And living on the East Coast, I actually got to eat fresh fish sometimes. So Georgetown might be different, but I want one other. You represented me just fine, thank you. But I was just thinking the Georgetown Hillel, their rule was that that everything that it was geared for vegetarians, that no meat was allowed, period, and that quite a few members of that Hillel at that time were vegetarians. And so I never heard anything criticizing that approach.
But you could argue, of course, that this is not quote unquote natural. Dogs eat meat, wolves eat meat, it's not just, it's not just people. I mean, they say people are the only one, or almost the only ones that kill for sport. That most other animals, if they kill something, it's because they want to eat it. But it's not like the whole natural world is vegetarian except for us. So you could argue that, what other, animals do is what is intended to be quote unquote natural. And but wolves don't eat fish that was wrapped in plastic.
One other thing
Scott.
related to I'm sorry, one other thing related to the plastic and preservation, and that is freezer, it's not just freezer burn, but it's spoilage. That if particularly fish, which tend to spoil more easily, if they're not properly stored, and that is air taken away from them, they spoil more rapidly. So one could argue the other side, that plastic, allows food to be edible for a longer period of time without spoilage, if it's properly preserved originally.
Okay, Sai.
I'm having a real problem in trying to get a relationship between God and food. I mean, there's no relationship in my mind between the two. They're so different, if you will. And yet we're making, the religion makes such a fuss over food. Can you explain something there, Rabbi?
Well, God emailed me about this very point 3 or 4 weeks ago, and he said, or she said, I mean, the Torah is filled with almost random laws and customs, and so there's a couple of sections in there about what you should eat and what you should not eat. The connection between those laws and God is not always explicit. And so you could argue that there isn't such a connection. But at the beginning here, Harvey Fields makes the point that, there's this concept of kedusha, holiness. And what is holiness? Well, we're not really sure exactly, but it's certainly being a good person. It's living life consistent with your values. It's trying to do what God wants, whatever that might mean to a person. And there may be other definitions of holiness. And so, Steve, if you make me okay, there, I think thank you. I can mute people. So you could argue that God is holy, and at least in our idealized conception of God, and we want to be holy, so that, it's another part of the, mentioning in Genesis that, we are made in the image of God. I know, Sai, does that convince you? All right, B, Marcia, and then Steve, if Steve wants to talk. B.
It sounds as if here that we're relating kosher to God's commandments.
Right.
What about the fact that, and my father explained this too, that it was man-made for health purposes, that the forbidden foods are not healthy.
Okay. So this is relating to the medieval argument of ta'amei hamitzvot, the reasons for the commandments. And Maimonides, for example, wanted to analyze the reasons for the commandments. Other rabbis said, no, don't touch it. Why? Because if you argue about the reasons of commandments, and I say, Lorraine, shake your head, Lorraine, if you hear me. Okay. I said, Lorraine, you shouldn't drive on Shabbat because, it's not part of peace on Shabbat. And Lorraine does a little research. She talks to her husband and to her best friends, and she says, Rabbi, I don't accept your reason. Therefore, I'm going to ride on Shabbat. So it risks undermining the law. Whereas if you just say it's a law, don't think about the reason, just do it, and you do it. So B is presenting a classic reason for kashrut, or at least part of kashrut, that the ancient Israelites came up with these things because certain things were seen as potentially dangerous. The prime example is pig. Thousands of years after the laws in the Torah, it came out that pigs carried a lot of trichinosis, and therefore eating pig, especially if it wasn't cooked really well, will put you at risk of catching this potentially very serious disease. So maybe that's the purpose. And a lot of the bottom feeders like catfish and so forth also had all sorts of diseases. So maybe that's the reason. Am I paraphrasing you correctly, B?
Yes.
So how do you feel? So this is what your mother told you,
My father.
father. So what is your, now that, this is many decades later, did he convince you that that's the reason?
He did, but I don't follow it all.
And is that because you believe that today there's a health department that will protect you?
Well, I just think that in the modern age, now I won't eat pork for some reason. I don't know. I won't go near it. And I won't eat cheeseburgers and things like that, but I have been known to eat lobster.
And
Because it tastes so good.
is that because you're convinced that the lobster you're going to eat in America is not going to make you very sick?
Well, I don't think it will make me that sick. I lived on the East Coast near the water, and the lobster fishermen were there, and I got to love lobster. So I eat it, but I won't bring it in my house.
Why?
I don't know. I won't bring non-kosher food into my house.
And so the old joke is that the person who says, I eat lobster out, but at home my dishes are strictly kosher, and the rabbi says to the person, Mazel tov, your dishes are going to go to heaven.
Well, in certain things, I don't know why. And you can spend your lifetime arguing about kosher. I think a lot of it comes from family background and what we were taught as children. And it helps to do some of the things to remind you of your family. And mine are all gone. So I do things in honor of them.
All right, well, but whether my parents ate something or didn't eat something at this point is really not that much of an influence on me. I may remember it, but I do partly what my religious influences and my reading has told me, and partly what I want to do. But what my parents did, I don't know. I don't really, I care only from a nostalgic point of view, not from anyway, Pam, comments about this? No. Okay, Marcia.
I was going to say exactly what B started with. I don't keep kosher. I didn't grow up in a kosher household. My father did grow up in a kosher household. He would not eat pork. My mom would make pork chops when my father had a night that he was working late, and that was a Thursday night. We got to eat food that Dad wouldn't eat, And he could not physically eat pork. It was just a mental thing with him, and I think that's with the same thing with B with certain foods, that you just can't do it. He would eat bacon, go figure, because I don't understand that myself, I think it's something that you just grew up with, and it's just there in your background and your mentality. And I think it's important, going back to Passover, which is special, I think, to remember. I mean, I don't keep totally Passover kosher positive, appropriate the whole time, but I have it in my mind when I'm not doing it right. I know I'm wrong, that I'm being bad about this, if you will. But I think it's like just what Bernie said. It's the tradition of it. It's to know that it's there, to remember that in our past, that, you know, to remember Passover immemorially, just constantly over the years. And I think that's important for people to do. The year-round kashrut stuff, that's a different story, I think, than Passover kashrut.
Okay. Lori,
So I think doing things that are pleasing to God is really, things that are pleasing to God. I think that's a really important thing for me. I definitely feel like rituals are the seeds that we plant to harvest meaning. So let's just say we were to go to Shabbat and we were to have services, right? If we didn't call people up for an aliyah, if we didn't read from the Torah, if we didn't stand and say the Amidah, we didn't do the Baruch, I mean, if we didn't do those rituals, right? We'd just be a bunch of people standing around on a special day. But those rituals allow us to make outward expressions to God. You know, this is what we do, this is who we are. And these things are pleasing to God. We know that Judaism teaches that obedience to the will of God is rewarded and disobedience is punished. So I feel like that it's not only doing good for God, but it's also allowing us to reap that meaning. Because if we don't do these rituals, we don't get that full meaning, that, you know, the feeling we get when we leave services, when we've taken aliyahs, you know, we get that certain special feeling that, you know, we did something meaningful. I think that's really important to reap that, to sow it, you know, to please God. I think, like Marcia said, when I'm not doing it, I know I'm wrong. I think that's, you know, really resonates with me. It's like, I want to do what's right. I know I'm commanded to do this. So for me, it's a natural mitzvah that I participate in.
and you can see the difference when you have a group that was raised with a lot of these rituals, or other rituals. Like if you look at people who convert to Judaism, and we could test that out, I get the vague impression that not everyone, but many of the best people who adjust to Judaism the best came from some sort of other ritual environment. If somebody was raised in a home where there was really nothing, well, I guess they presumably, if they're converting to Judaism, they're wanting to shift their ritual behavior from nothing to something. So maybe that wouldn't work. But I know, like, where we have people where everyone was raised with a lot of Jewish ritual or other ritual, and then even if they don't do it and you have a bar mitzvah with them, you see all these emotions and they connect or don't connect. And when you have a group which is so common today, where they may be Jewish or whatever, but they really have not been raised with very much of it. They're standing there like they're, and then they use the, you know, at the bar mitzvahs, you get this term, the audience, which I hate because it's supposed to be a congregation, but the people saying the word audience are not really lying. They're an audience. They're just sitting there looking at, like, you know, like they're not participating, you know, they don't know any of these prayers. They don't feel a connection to the ritual. Ritual is something that has to be, you have to build a relationship with it, and you have to know what you're doing, and you have to put effort into it and do it a lot.
But that doesn't mean it wouldn't resonate with them in a meaningful way. I mean, you still hear the prayers, they're still beautiful. You hear a cantor sing, you know, it warms your heart. I don't think that's lost on them. I don't think it's lost on the general audience or people who maybe haven't participated. I think they get something out of it. I think that they leave services after experiencing something like that feeling different. Okay. How can it not help but move you?
Okay. You haven't been to as many bar mitzvahs as I have.
Well, that is very possible.
Okay. Rick.
Yeah, I'm mostly here to learn. So but I have an interesting observation listening, because it really seems to come down to culture versus commandment. And, you know, you've got the commands, and I think Lori was kind of talking about that. You got the commands of God. But then you've got the culture of what you're raised in. And again, just trying to think analytically about how, you know, how does this all work? I think sometimes when it comes down, if it does come to culture, it is a lot more variable, because how you're raised is different. How your particular view, if we make decisions based on our culture or our opinion, then it will be scattered, and it will be greatly diverse. Whereas if you do have something by commandment, one, it's a lot harder to live because they're strict. But and I do think too, you know, regardless of all the little things, when there's a focus on God, I think because there's people are have a emptiness in them without God, I think they're drawn to it. So I could see where even if they're new, when you're talking about God, there's a certain relation that they feel, a certain call, a sense. And I'll just throw out one of my favorite artists is Scott Mutter, he was, as far as I know, an agnostic. He wasn't of any religion. But when you look at his work, and I've got several of them, when you look at his work, they're basically images put together. And one of them is a man, and it's like the Chicago Trade Center, where you see water down there, and you see an elevator going up and or escalator going up and an escalator going down. And there's that sense of, you know, we either go to heaven or we go to hell. And that's kind of overarching. I think we all sense that. So, you know, when we're talking about God, whether or not we can say, oh, I totally understand, or, you know, I'm searching, I think there's it resonates with us. So I do think people can be touched whether or not they're totally convinced.
So you agree with Lori?
And maybe with your bar and bat mitzvahs that you experienced where you didn't think that the message didn't resonate with them, or they didn't glean that meaning that you were hoping to impart to them. Maybe they did. Maybe they just didn't do it in that particular moment while you were present. Maybe they go home later that night. They lay down in bed and they think about their day, you know, and then they process their thoughts in a different way. So I don't think it would be possible to go to a service like a bar bat mitzvah and just come away without any sort of meaning. I don't think that, I don't see how that could be possible. I agree with you, Rick. I think somehow, you know, there's some meaning that they're gonna grapple with.
Okay, Steve and then Rick.
Okay, we're getting kind of off the topic here a little bit, but you know, if you attend a B'nai Mitzvah per se, and you know, there's not a lot of non-Jewish friends that are attending just as a courtesy and or respect for the B'nai Mitzvah. But typically in a situation like that, you usually have some type of pamphlet that explains all the rituals, or if they don't, then the rabbi or whoever's officiating will explain the rituals to those non-Jewish people so that they can be involved as well. So yeah, I agree.
Okay, Rick, and then we'll go on.
Well, I was just going to say, you know, different people come in with different sensitivities. So there are some people that they're as hard as a rock when it comes to anything about God, and there's other people that you know, any kind of, I mean, just seeing people that are coming together to worship their view of God is going to speak to them. So I think again, people, it varies depending on their sensitivity or interest in spiritual things.
Okay, thank you, Rick. And so there's Harvey Fields gives you one very brief paragraph about from an anthropological point of view about food taboos, and then he moves to several paragraphs about how some of the medieval Jewish thinkers looked at the food laws. So Marcia, can we ask you to keep going?
Sure. Rabbi Bernard J. Bamberger notes in his commentary to Leviticus that most people have some food taboos. Americans, for example, do not eat horse meat. Buddhists avoid all animal food. Hindus look upon the cow as sacred and do not eat beef. Studies of ancient cultures in Syria and Mesopotamia also reveal dietary codes reflecting an understanding of what might be considered unhealthy and healthy foods. I'm not going to read that whole thing. Physician and commentator Moses Maimonides believes that food that is forbidden by the laws of Torah is unfit for human consumption. Quoting the rabbis of the Talmud, he writes, "The mouth of the pig is as dirty as dung itself."
Whoa.
Regarding the prohibited fat of the intestine, Maimonides comments that it makes us full, interrupts the digestion, and produces cold and thick blood.
Whoa.
As for mixing meat and milk, he says that the result is undoubtedly gross food and makes the person overfull.
Uh-oh.
The author of Sefer HaHinuch, possibly Aharon Halevi,
And this is the Spanish 13th century book, which lists all of the 613 mitzvot, divides them into positive and negative. And of course, he makes his own determination what are the 613 commandments. So it's an interesting book.
he agrees with Maimonides' medical approach. He argues that our perfect Torah separated us from harmful factors. This is the common sense reason for the Torah's dietary prohibitions.
Okay, that's going to what B said earlier.
Yes. If the harmful character of some of these forbidden foods is unknown to us or to medical science, do not be puzzled, since the true physician, God,
Whoa. He's comparing Anthony Fauci with God.
okay, who warned us regarding them, is wiser than us about them.
So God is the physician in chief, and God is going to prohibit foods that might harm us. And you could, of course, argue, well, then why did God create those foods? Or God could make such an animal just inedible, so you wouldn't, like a lionfish or something, it's got these prickles and spears on it. You wouldn't normally eat it because it's obviously, not intended to be eaten. So why not do that? But okay, keep going.
Arama feared that if the Torah's laws about forbidden foods were reduced to medical suggestions, with the discovery of a medical cure for the harm caused by a particular food, there would be no further reason for the Torah prohibition to be observed. The effect would make the Torah superfluous.
Okay, so you skipped a paragraph, but never mind. It's just the paragraph you skipped said that if the
I'm
dietary
sorry.
laws are only about medical consideration,
You're right, I did, yeah.
then it's just a medical book, then it's not a religion, so it's got to have something more than just medical knowledge. Okay, keep going from where
Sorry
you
about that.
never mind.
Most interpreters would agree with Arama, pointing out that a medical or dietary justification for the laws of kashrut is indefensible.
Or putting it only a medical definition. That maybe B's father might say, we don't eat this because it's bad for you, but he needed to add, there's another reason as well. Okay.
While some laws make sense in terms of hygiene, the Torah also forbids the eating of many foods that present no danger at all to human beings. Crabs, scallops, shrimp, catfish, sharks, swordfish, pork, to mention a few. Furthermore, the separation of milk and meat products does not seem to be justified by any dietary or medical consideration. For these reasons, Abravanel agreed with Arama, concludes that the Torah did not come to take the place of a medical handbook, but to protect our spiritual health. He declares that foods forbidden by the Torah and by the rabbis who developed the dietary laws of Jewish tradition poison the pure and intellectual soul, clogging the human temperament, demoralizing the character, promoting an unclean spirit, defiling in thought and deed, driving out pure and holy spirit. In other words, they bring spiritual trouble, disaster to those who consume them.
Wow. And you remember Abravanel, he was the Minister of Finance for Ferdinand and Isabella in Spain
Oh, yeah.
in 1492. And they offered him an exemption from the expulsion order. But of course, to be the only legal Jew left in the entire country would probably not be a good position to be in. So he went in exile in Italy, and, having been forced to retire early, he was able to then write a lot of books, and so it kind of worked out for him. But so what is he saying?
Unfortunately, Abravanel never explains how the forbidden foods of the Torah lead to such moral and intellectual corruption. However, other interpreters make a connection between the dietary laws and spiritual health.
Okay, we're going back 1500 years to Philo, who lived before the destruction of the Second Temple.
The philosopher Philo explains that the dietary laws teach human beings to control their bodily appetites. For instance, the law permitting the eating only of animals that have divided hoofs and chew their cud contains a special method.
I'm tuned into my Torah study right now.
It teaches that a
Oh,
person, what is that? It was something, I could hear something in the back.
I muted it.
Oh, okay. It teaches that a person will reach the true wisdom only by learning to divide and distinguish various ideas from one another by chewing over the facts and concepts that may have been gained through study.
Okay, stop. Okay, comments.
That's weird.
We're looking for other things. Pam?
Rabbi, do you think God created the Karush rules more for keeping the Jews healthy, or for just having them be distinctive from any other groups?
You're asking me personally? Clearly
Yes.
the latter.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, which do you think was more important, that they provided this because they thought they would be healthier, or they wanted to have the Jews have a different thing than the rest of the world?
Wanted them to have the Jews have a different thing.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with, maybe B's father's right. It may have had something to do with the health, but that's not the primary reason at all. I mean, if
That's
it
what I'm
was-
thinking. It was to define them as a different group than everybody else because of their different,
Right, and that's why I like it. So that's why when I read the thing about that these rabbis don't find Passover food restrictions meaningful, I just found that very surprising in a bad way.
So,
Yes, Marcia.
so are you saying sort of what I'm saying? I said a while back that Passover restrictions, that I consider those special, even though I don't keep Passover. I am so aware on a daily basis of the Passover restrictions.
Right, and it reminds you that it's Passover, and
Special.
if you could eat beer with sandwiches, then there's no Passover doesn't really exist in your mind other than the Seder.
Right.
You have to have some physical, connection. So not eating bread and so forth. Yes, Sai.
I was wondering why over the years, when these laws were written by various and sundry people, they were adopted as finality. I mean, it's like I decided that I'm going to write something and everybody's got to listen to it. What gives it its final stamp of approval? What makes it so, if you will? What makes it God's voice?
That's a great question. And of course, I don't have an answer, but I think that it was a lot of these things were widely practiced in ancient Israelite society. Why they were practiced, I don't know. I think the writing in Torah came after they were already widely practiced. And then there's other things that may have been written in the Torah that weren't widely practiced, and they're still in the Torah, but the rabbis had to explain why they weren't practiced. So there's what is called in sociology of religion, lived religion, quote unquote. And lived religion is different than book religion or textual religion, in that lived religion is what people actually do.
Twice.
So I could write a bunch of articles about Reform Judaism, and in 100 years, they could be studying Reform Judaism in Phoenix, Arizona, and they come across my articles on the microfilm, and they say, aha. And then they write a whole book, Reform Judaism in Phoenix, Arizona in the early 21st century. And they use my articles as a main source. But what I say and what people do is probably very different. And so what they would need to do to really get a better picture would be to find out what each of you do. And Cy might write these long emails about what he thinks, and that may not be typical either. So lived religion becomes very important. And the archaeologists have really made some major inroads in the last 20 years. Jody Magnus has some interesting books on that, although I watched some of her lectures and she's so boring I couldn't watch her. But she, I think her last book is Daily Life in Ancient Israel. And, she talks about dung, D-U-N-G, because the dung tells you, they can analyze it chemically and they can come up with a lot of interesting information about diet. And from diet, they can see, well, what are the actual Israelites actually doing? Compare that to the text and see, how accurate do the texts reflect what people do? But I would argue, side, that if they do reflect what people do, it's not so much that people are reading these texts and then following them, as much as the text is reflecting what people already do. I mean, I could write 100 articles for JewishPhoenix.com and it won't affect anyone's behavior. But if I write basically about what people do already, then what I'm writing is exactly what people are doing. So you have to kind of go with the flow rather than trying to influence people to do things they don't want to do.
I think what makes it so is choice. I think people choose. They choose to follow God's commandments. They choose to, follow the laws and the dietary laws. And that's what makes it so for them. It's not something that you're being forced to do because you're given free will. We know we're given free will. So I definitely feel it's about choice. I find it really interesting that Maimonides refers to the Torah as our perfect Torah when he was excommunicated for not believing in parts of the Torah.
Uh-huh.
But I really liked what Philo said. Philo said, and I love Philo, he's one of my favorites, that, various ideas from one another, and by chewing over the facts and concepts that we have maybe gained through the Torah study or through study. And in my study as a Jewish vegetarian, that we have rules that tell us what we can and what we can't eat. In Genesis, see, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon all the earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit. They shall be yours for food. We get over to the animals and they're separating the animals. And then we go into Leviticus and then this one makes you impure, or this one's an abomination. But then in Genesis, we also learned, it says, where is it? Let me find it. Let me go to Genesis, the right chapter in Genesis. In Genesis chapter 9 and verse 5, it says, is it 9:5? I'm in 5. I have to find it. I'm moving as quick as I can. It's hard to back up my facts without a fast mouse. It says, but for your own lifeblood, I will require a reckoning. I will require it of every beast of humankind too. Will I require a reckoning for human life? So if you eat a beast and you eat an animal, there's going to be a reckoning for that. So, there's like mixed messages. Yes, there are animals you can eat. Some are impure, some are an abomination. There's going to be a reckoning for the animals that you do eat. You know what I mean? But I definitely feel like, what I've learned from the Torah is, again, it comes down to how you perceive things and how you choose. Like, to me, it says thou shalt not kill. Okay, so kill is not, or thou shalt not murder. So is killing murder? I know that's how some people justify the eating of meat. Well, it says not to murder, we're just killing the animal. But I think to the animal that might be considered being murdered. Like if you ask that cow that was just slaughtered, were you murdered? He might actually say yes if he could. So I think it all comes down to perception as well. But I definitely feel like there's really, I don't know where he's going, but in my learning, I guess I was going with what Philo said, to kind of chew over the facts, see what you've learned, make out of it what you can make out of it.
Well, Philo is saying that the laws of eating, and really all laws, are designed to help us develop wisdom, and that the goal of religion is to develop wisdom. And I think this was something that probably most or all of us would agree with. And Maimonides is not really disagreeing with that. I don't like that Harvey Fields does this, where he jumps from Maimonides in the 12th century back to Philo, who's in the 1st century, without, pointing out that we're going backwards 1,200 years. But I guess that's how Harvey Fields operates. But
And
yeah,
I wonder what Philo meant by, a person will reach true wisdom. Who's going to define that? I mean, ultimately, when we're with God, we'll know at times, or we'll know what he allows us to know about what that true wisdom is. I think for me,
Maimonides understood true wisdom as philosophic analysis. So it's not necessarily the answers, it's more the system of thinking. All right, Bernie or Donna or Shirley, any other comments here right now? All right, let's go on. Marcia.
A Hasidic teacher, Levi Isaac of Berdovchev, also offers an interpretation for the laws of kashrut that pertains to spiritual health. He points out that the laws concerning permitted and forbidden foods have to do with what one allows to enter the mouth. If there is no discipline concerning what one eats, if one is careless about consuming forbidden foods, it is likely that one may also be insensitive and careless about what one says, about slandering and lying, about what comes out of the mouth. Kashrut for Levi Isaac is not only about food, it is also meant to help us keep our mouths clean and pure from harmful talk. That's strange. Okay. David Blumenthal elaborates on Levi Isaac's observation. Keeping kosher is a way of preparing oneself to receive the word of God. It is a way of cultivating the bodily habits that will make one a fit receptacle for the divine presence. In other words, observing the dietary laws sensitizes one to all other laws of Torah. It leads to the observance of them, and it leads one to be more open to the spiritual message of Judaism.
Keep going. Next page, top of 118, left side.
Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz makes a similar observation. He argues that all the laws pertaining to kashrut are based on the principle that a man cannot live a higher, nobler life of the spirit without having the body undergo some suitable preparation for it. For Steinsaltz, body and soul are connected. What a person eats influences feelings, responses, and readiness to unite with influences of good or evil in the world. Observing the dietary laws, says Steinsaltz, makes one more sensitive to holiness and to the tasks of bringing all things in the world to the state of tikkun or perfection.
Okay, Minya, do you want to pick up and read a little bit?
Who is that?
Minya?
Me? In contrast to those who argue what the laws of kashrut protect and promote spiritual health, other commentators argue that they are a means of separating Jews from non-Jews. Samuel David Luzzatto observes that every Jew must be set apart in laws and ways of life from other nations so as not to imitate their behavior. The laws we observe make us remember at every moment the God who commanded them. The numerous mitzvot and laws of our Torah custom human beings to exercise self-control. Luzzatto's point is clear. The dietary laws are a way of preventing Jews from abandoning their faith by falling into the imitation of non-Jewish customs. Since eating is a constant activity, a natural process, observing kashrut will become a constant reminder of the unique values, traditions, and obligations of Jewish living. Mordechai M. Kaplan agrees with Luzzatto, but extends his conclusions about the power of the dietary laws to the preservation of the Jewish people. Kaplan explains that the purpose of kashrut is to make the people of Israel aware of its dedication to God as a priestly or holy people. However, argues Kaplan, that purpose has expanded over the centuries. Kashrut has contributed to the perpetuation of the Jewish people and the retention of its way of life. In other words, the dietary laws regulating what a Jew shall and shall not eat are a means of preserving Jewish identity and Jewish loyalty. Kashrut, Kaplan concludes, is particularly effective in lending Jewish atmosphere to the home, which in the diaspora is our last-ditch defense against the inroads of assimilation. In Kaplan's view, the benefit of kashrut is neither medical nor symbolic. Kashrut is an effective means of guaranteeing Jewish survival.
Okay, stop there. So far we've hit three theories at least. One is that kashrut is a medical thing. This was B's father's position, that you don't eat certain foods because God was worried you'd get sick from them, certainly in the ancient world. Theory two is that it is symbolic, and Philo's idea that, that following certain food laws could help lead us to the road to wisdom. In Maimonides' thinking, it can be part of a process where we develop philosophic analysis. And view three, which is Mordechai Kaplan, is it's a way to prevent radical assimilation, complete assimilation, which is we've seen, failed that, in Phoenix, there's perhaps 100,000 people of Jewish background, and only 10,000 maximum have any connection with anything, no matter how minimal. I mean, just signing up for an email blast is considered, one of those 10,000. So only 10% do anything. And how many of those do it seriously? And, one could argue if they practiced the food laws, then that would have led them to, be more interested and involved. Comments on any of those three theories, particularly the last one? Mordechai Kaplan, of course, is the founder of Reconstructionist Judaism. Bernie?
I vote for number three, door number three.
I had the feeling you might say that. Why?
Well, I can relate to it. When we first got married, my wife had no experience with kashrut at all. But we decided that we had busy lives. I was still in school, etc. And we needed something to remind us that we were Jewish. And once the kids were born, we said, you know what? We don't need that anymore. We'll belong to a temple, and that will continue our feeling of belonging.
And did it work?
I don't know. I'm still here. I've been a member of several synagogues along the way.
Okay, well, and did it give you a certain sense of inner peace, a spiritual sense, or did it give you a sense of philosophic awareness? Or both?
I think it just gives me a sense of belonging to a community.
Okay, so it didn't do
Like me.
either of these other things.
Say that again.
It didn't move you in a spiritual direction, and it didn't move you in a philosophic direction. It just served the original intent, which was to keep you identified.
Right.
Okay.
I find as I go along in life, I realize how not spiritual I am.
Okay. Well, Pam, B. Minya, Reva.
Yeah, I was doing the same thing you were doing. I was subdividing the various elements of why keep kosher, and I agree with you overall, but I came away with four areas. I subdivided to promote holiness and relationship to God, the Philo comment, and also to develop wisdom. And the example given was related to slander, but I thought of it as how we relate to people. So the subdivision was our relationship with God, our relationship with people, and then the other two, the medical reasons, which we didn't feel strongly about, and sustaining Jewish identity. So that's how I came up with 4 rather than 3, breaking out relationship with God, relationship with people, encouraged by keeping kosher. My question is, for many of us who do not keep kosher, how do we sustain our Jewish identity?
You don't.
I'm not sure that's a satisfying answer.
But that's the reality. If you look at America today, the people that don't maintain any dietary restrictions also are unable to perpetuate Jewish identity.
Okay, can I comment?
Yes, Lori and then Marcia.
So-
And then Reva can respond.
So Riva, it's really hard to follow all 613 commandments. I definitely feel like people have to go at their own pace, and maybe not at this moment. Are you feeling like keeping kosher is the mitzvah that's going to bring you meaning? But what you are doing by studying Torah, Lishma, for the love of Torah, what you're doing, you are perpetuating your Jewish identity. I don't think you're precluding yourself from being part of the Jewish people. It does say, and I know I talk scripture a lot, but it really helps me to reference what I have to say. But it says, God goes on to talk to Moses. And he says, you shall not copy the practices of the land of Egypt where you dwelt, or of the land of Canaan to which I am taking you, nor shall you follow their laws. It goes on, like lists a lot of laws about uncovering nakedness, of who and what and how that works. But it says, do not defile yourselves in any of those ways, for it is by such that the nations that I am casting out before you defiled themselves. And it says, thus the land became defiled, and I called it to account for its iniquity, and the land spewed out its inhabitants. So it's about survival. It is about the survival of the Jewish people, right? We have to keep these laws. We have to do these things. We have to not repeat the mistakes of the people who were before us that were cast out, so that we don't become outcasts ourselves. But I definitely think it's a process. I think that you studying Torah and being in this class is a way that you're going to retain some Jewish identity. Just stay the course.
Thank you very much. I agree with you. I think there are multiple ways to stay Jewish, not exclusively keeping kosher, for sure. Like you, I had a mixed marriage or mixed relationship. Was married to a wonderful man who was Orthodox and sometimes kept kosher, and we had 2 refrigerators throughout our relationship. For me, I would place more emphasis on our relationships with other people and our conduct with other people and our conduct with God, which is very, very individual. I would also say that within this group here, this small group of 3, 6, 9, 12, 13, 14 people, there are very different views of how we perceive and how we connect to God. And yours is an example of one of those views, but there are really multiple views of how we perceive God and his role in our lives.
Well, I also believe there are many paths to salvation. So, I don't think that my way is the only way.
No, I'm
So-
comfortable with many paths to the divine also.
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely feel, I just don't want you to think because you don't keep kosher that you're not Jewish all of a sudden. I don't agree with that. I mean, the rabbi could be right, but I just simply don't agree with that. I
I
mean,
was speaking from a sociological point of view,
oh, okay.
that people that don't do any food restrictions, it'd be interesting to see a study, what happens with their children and grandchildren versus those who do follow food restrictions. But my suspicion would be that people who do follow food restrictions are much more likely to be able to pass on Jewish identity.
Well, that would fall into the category of the more you put into it, the more you get out of it, right? The more you can pass on, the more your children will pick up. So, but it's definitely a process. I think everybody who's here is on that journey. So, and I think we should all be, doesn't it say somewhere, Rabbi, you probably know the quote better than I do, that the study of Torah is greater than other things in Pirkei Avot, right? Somewhere.
That there's a whole long list of things, and then it says, in the study of Torah is greater than them all.
Yes, so you're doing a great job by studying Torah, and I thank you for that.
Okay, were there other comments? I think Marcia and B and Minya.
When we got married, we decided that we were going to keep kosher because we thought that would be an important thing to do as we had children. And they were used to certain things. Like if you ask them today, they'll tell you all the work we did to change the cabinets and get the food out and the dishes washed and all of that business. And I personally think that my children, maybe others are the same way, distinguished themselves from their friends, not by what they ate, but who celebrated Christmas and who didn't. I think that young kids, especially, they don't exactly understand why they're not celebrating something when it's there, when they're young also. And I found that as they got older, it didn't mean anything to them that we did keep kosher. They knew that was different than other friends. My son still remembers when he used the wrong spoon in the house and I made him stick it in one of the plant pots. And he still talks about that. But I think that food itself is not enough to make you, to give you a connection to God. There's so many other things that make us Jews. And I don't think that just, talking about the food and the restrictions and the whatever, like there was one, I have to go back to that because I was going to ask about it. Why did one rabbinical authority say that it was okay to eat sturgeon and swordfish and another didn't? So which one is the authority? You want to eat swordfish, you eat it, or if you don't want it, you don't eat it. So that's not it's not a real dietary law then if there's no specific answer, in my opinion. But I just wanted to mention that about kids and how they grow up and what they believe in. Can I quickly tell you another story about bugs? Our family in Brooklyn is Orthodox. My niece called me one time and she said, look in your refrigerator and make sure you don't have Foxy lettuce. I think most of you know what Foxy is. It's a brand. And I said, why? She says, because it's not kosher. I said, how can lettuce not be kosher? And she said, because they have bugs in them. And bugs are not kosher. So if you have Foxy lettuce, you better get rid of it.
What is Foxy lettuce?
Foxy's a brand. Maybe it's East Coast, I don't know. But they make all kinds of produce and it's wrapped with. So she said, because they were told, they got a special message from their rabbi that Foxy lettuce had bugs, it's not kosher. I'm done.
Okay, we have time for just a couple of short final comments. B?
You have to unmute B.
Hear you.
I'm interested in what Minya said very much, but I didn't keep a kosher home because my husband who is Jewish, didn't want it. So I followed what my husband wanted to do. Those were the old days. But my children, I've always felt very Jewish and celebrated the holidays, went to shul with the kids. They were all bar mitzvahed, confirmed, and my girls are not practicing Judaism. And I don't know why.
Why do you think that's the case? You think you blame your husband that if you had practiced?
No, I don't. No, I don't. I blame him for a lot of other things, but not for that. No, I just think that children being brought up in America, Jewish children, have so many other things coming at them. The culture of Americans, and they want to feel like they belong. And Judaism differentiates you. And some of the children, my grandson's been in college. He's never been to Hillel. My granddaughter has. She's more religious. But my daughters, well, one married a practicing Catholic, and my grandson is Catholic. And my other daughter somehow walked away from Judaism.
And
So I feel like, well, what could I have done? And I can't come up with an answer.
so connecting that back to the subject to today in terms of food laws, do you think food laws could or would or should have played any role in this? Or is this
don't-
not a major thing one way or the other?
I don't know. And when I listen to Minya, I come from a kosher Orthodox home. And I didn't believe all of it. My parents did go to the Chinese restaurant, which every other Orthodox Jew was in. So I don't believe all of it, but I do feel very Jewish, and I don't know if my girls do it all.
He says.
Minya?
I just want
And
to follow
Sai.
up to that. My children also had bar and bat mitzvahs, and that kind of was the end of where I could control what they were doing in terms of religion. Because once they get out of the house and they choose their friends, that's what's going to determine which path they're going to take. And they had many friends who were not Jewish. They had a few that were, but they made their own choices, and neither one of them practices Judaism.
And bringing it back to the food issue, do you think that played a major role or minor role or no role at all?
I don't think it played a role at all. They knew what went on at home, but when they were not at home, they did it their way.
Sai, I think will be the final comment.
I just wanted to make comment that we're all aware of the fact that there are less and less people practicing any kind of religion in the world today. And what should be a concern to those people is artificial intelligence and religion. That is going to make a huge, huge difference. That's all I have to say.
Riva, and then I'll make a quick comment on Sai.
Yeah, I just want to comment back on, with reference to my husband who was Orthodox and sometimes kept kosher, but not always. But what I really respected enormously in his Jewish connection was his extraordinary ethical conduct and his love of studying Torah and the way he conducted his life, his values and his beliefs. And I think they were strongly influenced by his Jewish heritage. And those things I respect enormously. We divided to some degree on kashrut, but that for me was not the key issue of what made him a Jew and make me want to be connect at a deeper level with Judaism and study Torah.
Okay, thank you, Riva. And Sai's comment on artificial intelligence is very interesting. I guess we'll pick that up at another time. Over to you, Steve.
Okay, a couple of things. First of all, Friday night, Scholar in Residence at the Temple, Friday night, and then Saturday afternoon, I believe it's also going to have the Scholar in Residence speak, and then we're going to have wine and cheese and all good stuff.
How to steal priceless French art.
Yes, French art. Second of all, the new member Shabbat is May the 5th. And I believe we have what, about 20 new members, Rabbi? Something like that. Okay, so, and we're gonna have a pizza dinner. Brother is providing the pizza and the drinks. And then we're gonna ask for people to bring desserts after for the oneg. Then also May 7th at 10:30 is the Mother's Day brunch.
Right.
Also provided by the Brotherhood. I think it's gonna be $18. I don't know if it's been finalized yet, but put that on your calendar if some of the moms want to join us for the week before Mother's Day. So if in case you do have family here, then you can celebrate it with your family at a restaurant or at home. So that's all I have.
Okay, good. And we do the final blessing.
Blessing, okay. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Baruch atah
Adonai,
Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, v'chayei olam notah b'tokeinu. Baruch atah Adonai,
No,
notein haTorah. Blessed is Adonai our God, ruler of the universe,
who has
who has
given
given us a teaching of truth,
truth,
implanting within us eternal life.
life,
Ever blessed Adonai
giver of
of the Torah. Amen.
Yeah.
Anything else? Anyone else have anything for the good of the order? If not, see you guys later.
Lively discussion.
Okay.